is the big one. This year, the decisions voters make in November will reverberate for generations to come. We must be on the right side of history. The suffrage movement that fought for the rights for women to participate in the electoral process were on the right side of history. The Parkland students who mobilized thousands of young people across this nation demanding lawmakers to enact gun control, they were on the right side of history. Our late Congressman John Robert Lewis, who whispered with his last remaining breath the urgency of being on the right side of history, lived his life embodying the importance. There's absolutely no doubt John Robert Lewis was on the right side of history. Less than a week ago, we lost another champion in the fight for equality, the notorious RBG, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. This wise and witty warrior left us with many pearls of wisdom, one of which resonates with me particularly in this moment. Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. Good evening. I am Dr. Joan Coker, proud president of the Wilmington, Delaware chapter of the Links Incorporated, a service-oriented organization of more than 17,000 women leaders from every walk of life. Welcome to our virtual town hall. Voting in the upcoming election? Know before you go. Many of our members from across the Eastern area and beyond are joining us virtually. To our Eastern Area Director, Dr. Shawana Tucker Sims, all elected and appointed officials, including our immediate past president and Eastern Area Program Chair, Rhonda Starks Crowder. We thank you for lending your voice to this very important discussion. If our national president, Dr. Kimberly Jeffries Leonard, has tuned in, we wish to acknowledge her, along with all other elected and appointed national officers, and each and every concerned citizen who desires to know more before you go to the polls on November 3rd. This virtual town hall is for you and yours. We are hearing from our citizens across demographic dividers, from up and down the first state. There's chatter in the air, there's uncertainty and unreadiness. You have questions? We have corralled a panel of experts to provide these answers. The objectives of this town hall are quite simple. Number one, to educate Delawareans on the registration and the voting processes and key deadlines and dates for the 2020 general election, to help minimize voter skepticism, to advocate to Delawareans on the importance of developing a voting execution plan, to educate Delawareans on the voting options, and lastly, to inform each Delawarean on the safety and the security of voting during the pandemic. Fielding questions from our viewers is Sharice Brewington Carr, our Legislative and Public Affairs Chair. We want to thank Mr. Anthony Albence, Commissioner of the Board of Elections in Delaware, Ms. Tracy Dixon, Director of the Board of Elections, Mr. Leroy Tice, attorney, here to advise us of our rights. And moderating for us this evening is Miss Ashley Davis. She's a senior at Delaware State University. She's a communications major with a minor in legal studies, with a long-term goal of becoming a lawyer. Ashley is the reigning Miss Delaware State University. Welcome, everyone. Ashley, let's get this program started.
Thank you, Dr. Coker. To the Department of Elections, could you explain the registration process, the technology that is available to check registration, and the identification that is required to vote?
Sure. We have a couple different ways, various different ways you can register. A lot of our registrations come through the Department of Motor Vehicles. first state that actually integrated with the Department of Motor Vehicles. So many people who are, if you are watching, or even people in the studio here, when you visit the DMV and conducted different transactions, you would be presented with an opportunity to either register to vote or to update your registration. And that happens right on the keypad there that you complete your motor vehicle transaction on. And we get that information in real time and can process that. So, fairly quickly after you make an update to your registration or complete a new registration, you would receive a polling place card, just confirming your address and your polling place, things of that nature. That's one method that we have, and the vast majority of our registrations come through that means. We also have the iVote, which is our online registration tool, ivote.de.gov. That's another means to not just register, rather, or update your registration. And that's a whole host of tools that you can access. For example, during election season, you have a sample ballot you can access and determine what will be on your ballot, what your ballot will look like when you go to the polling place or vote by mail, either absentee or vote by mail. You can check your polling, as I mentioned, polling place location, your elected officials, your voting history. You can also request an absentee or vote by mail ballot through that portal, and also check the status of your application for a vote by mail or absentee ballot. It has a whole host of opportunities there, such as indicating whether your application was received, your ballot was sent, your ballot was returned. In addition to those means, you always have the option to either download from our website a paper application and complete that, send that back to us, or come to our offices. I know in recent months, access to buildings has been a little more challenging, but our offices are open and ready to serve individuals. We have all the protections in place, social distancing, personal protective equipment. If someone wishes to come into our office in person and register, we'll be happy to help you as well. So there's a lot of ways that you can register in various means, whatever are convenient for you.
Thank you. Ms. Dixon, can you walk us through how a person would vote in person in Delaware?
Certainly. We do have, for this upcoming election on November 3rd, we have approximately 170 polling locations that will be open in Newcastle County. As Mr. Albence mentioned, you can go to ivote.de.gov to find out where your specific voting location is. You should also have your polling place card, which will tell you what your location is where you need to cast your vote. Previously, with the presidential primary, we had vote centers where you could vote anywhere, but that has been changed back to the traditional way where you have to vote where you have to specifically vote. So when you go to your polling location, there we have new machines and we have new electronic poll books that are updated throughout the day with information. So when you go, you would scan your license. Well, the poll worker will scan your license, they will scan your polling place card, or we can look you up manually to determine if you are active, if you have already returned your absentee ballot or your vote by mail ballot, if you have been sent one but you haven't received it. So there are a number of ways that we confirm whether or not you're actually able to vote at your polling location that day. And once we have determined that at the polling location, we then allow you to go to the machine to cast your vote. Previously, you would have to go to a specific machine that had your ballot. With the new voting machines, we're able to have different ballots on there electronically, so you will just get your ballot for your particular political party on your screen. So there will be no issue of possibly voting for a different person, for a different party. So you will just get your elected officials that you can vote for based on your political party. So we do have lots of poll workers that will be there to assist you should you have a question while you're there at your polling place.
Okay, so how would a person vote in mail with a mail-in ballot?
So with the mail-in ballot, we have two different types. We have the absentee ballot and we have the vote by mail. With the absentee ballot, you need a specific reason to request that. With the legislation that passed recently, we have vote by mail where you're not required to have a specific reason. And basically that legislation was passed to assist with the COVID-19 issue that we're currently experiencing. So you can go again to ivote.de.gov, request either the absentee or the vote by mail ballot. That the request will be received by our office. We will mail your specific ballot for your specific area. It's called a precinct. We'll mail your specific precinct ballot to you. You can fill that out. You can either drop it off at one of our ballot drop boxes, which are located either at the State Building on French Street or at our warehouse location on Lisa Drive in Newcastle. You can bring it in, or you can mail it back, whichever you choose.
Thank you.
Well,
Okay, this next question is for both of you. It seems the global health pandemic has become a perfect scapegoat to suppress young voters. With an anticipated increase in Generation Z voters, where can first-time voters go to learn more about the entire voting process?
Sure, I can take that. Certainly go to our website again, which is elections.delaware.gov. We have a host of information, and that's our general Department of Elections website, in addition to the iVote portal that we spoke about earlier. And voters really can find out a whole host of information. iVote gives them more personalized information about their own particular experience, whether it be their polling place or their particular ballot style. But the elections.delaware.gov site has a host of general information as well. Elections law, kind of information regarding, as Ms. Dixon mentioned, our precincts or election districts here in Delaware. People can view a host of information, whether it be election district maps, again, contact information about their local elected officials. And we encourage people to find out more. Look yourself up, find out where your district is, find out the boundaries of your representative district, your election district, your state senate district. Find out who your representative is. Contact their office if you have any questions about the legislative process, about laws that are in place. We always encourage that. We're very committed to providing as much information as possible. And really, a lot of people contact our office even for research purposes, because we have a lot of historical information on our website. You can look back in our archived information for voter turnout, voter history, different elections, who are the candidates, what was the vote turnout by district, by area. So there's a whole host of information. If there's something that someone can't find, we're happy to assist and answer questions and find information. And we're always ready to assist if there's a question about particular voting policy, things of that nature. We also have links on our site to other Delaware resources, such as the Delaware Code, which is the Delaware state law, Delaware Constitution. Those are basically our guiding documents by which we operate under. And they provide a lot of the foundational items under which we have election practices in place, because everything is based upon state law, state constitution, and that really determines how we conduct elections in Delaware.
Thank you. Okay, question. So some states mandate government-issued ID cards, while other states do not. Can you provide an update on Delaware's voter ID laws?
Sure, absolutely. In Delaware, we are not a photo ID state. They hear about that a lot in the news. Delaware does not require photo identification. The way it works in Delaware is that an identification is requested when you go to the polling place. And the poll workers or election workers, election officers rather, are instructed about that. We don't have a definitive list of identification. Some states do, we do not. We have a list of identification options that is not an exhaustive list. Essentially, when identification is requested at the polling place, essentially it's to confirm the identity of the voter and as well as their residence to determine that they're qualified to vote in that location. As Ms. Dixon mentioned, our new technology that we have available through poll books does expedite the process if a voter presents a driver's license or a state ID, because we're able to scan that barcode on the back of that, and that pulls up the voter individually very quickly. People may be familiar with the older method where we had poll lists, and years ago we had cards, in fact, where you had to physically go to a certain designated line, a certain section of the alphabet, flip through the pages and look for that. The poll books eliminate all of that. You can check in at any location, and the system can look you up basically instantaneously. But you don't need to present a photo ID. Again, you don't need to present a driver's license or a state ID. Delaware also has a provision in our laws that if an individual voter is at their correct polling location, they're on the poll list, or in this case we should say in the poll book, meaning they're an active voter at the correct location, and they either do not have identification or they choose not to present ID, Delaware does have a provision in our law where that voter can complete an affidavit that affirms their identity. And they're affirming under penalty of law that they are who they say they are and they're eligible to vote in that location. And then they would be permitted to vote. So there's a number of different options.
Thank you.
Mr. Tice, did you want to expound on any of that as far as the voter ID and the legalities that may occur when someone is turned away for that reason?
Well, first of all, I think I'd like to add, I'm going to make sure I'm not hyper-political here, but 18 to 25-year-olds in this particular election are very important. And I think the question began with the effects of COVID-19 and on the younger generations. And I would say, and of course the younger generations are somewhat mobile. I would say, in addition to what Mr. Albin said, just know the state you're going to, or you intend to vote in, and know the deadline for that state, know the requirements for that state. Right. The questions that we're answering here are largely Delaware specific, but again, we have Delaware State University students who may intend to vote in their home state or their official state of residence. The best plan is be prepared so that you can avoid any impropriety. So being prepared means knowing the deadlines for that state that you are in. There's also, I believe it's the National Conference of State Legislators. They have information on which states require ID and which states do not. Again, that's the National Conference of State Legislators. And I believe the number at this point, or the divide, is 36 states that do and 14 states that do not require ID. So know your rights. The preparedness is the best prevention of any illegality. And I think your question furthermore was being turned away at the polls. Again, prevention is in the preparedness. Find out if you need ID. Make sure you know where you're registered and where your polling place is. There are some questions about whether, if you are in line, are you permitted to vote, or do they have to let you vote? I believe the answer to that question is yes. If you are in line, stay in line, but be there within the designated time. If you are, or if someone does intend to disenfranchise you or state that you are ineligible, document the event. Get people's names, get time, get place, and really document the nuances of the event. So at some point, if it has to be challenged, you may do that. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that going forward tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. So how do I know that I'm registered, and how do I assure that my registration info is accurate?
Probably the easiest way for Delaware viewers certainly is to go to iVote. Go to ivote.de.gov, check your registration status, and that will give you all the information that you need. And certainly, if you do notice that there's something that is out of the ordinary or something you're not expecting, then certainly use the contact information to contact your appropriate elections county office for either Newcastle, Kent, or Sussex if you're in Delaware. And they can certainly work with you to make any corrections. But iVote is the best bet because, again, that gives you kind of everything in a one-stop shop, and you can see that kind of a snapshot of your whole scenario.
Thank you. So do you recommend to vote in person or through mail-in? Which one do you believe is better?
Well, we really are happy to provide both options, honestly. Ms. Dixon mentioned, the legislature recently this year did pass the legislation. Governor Carney signed it into law for the vote by mail. So that provided an additional option. So we, under the provisions of that law, that did not change in-person voting at all. So both are completely available to you. It really is a matter of your preference and whatever's convenient for you. If you anticipate that you will be in your polling location, you'll be local on election day, please certainly make plans if you wish to vote in person. Again, Ms. Dixon mentioned we have a whole host of measures in place: personal protective equipment, social distancing, all of those types of scenarios to ensure a safe environment. Completely your choice. If you would prefer to, again, vote by mail, that's available to you as well. So it's really kind of a both and. We have both options, and it's really up to the preference of the voter.
So I got a quick question to follow up on that.
Sure.
Because this is the $10 million question
Sure.
that I get every day in the office. Folks are like, I will saran wrap myself if I need to get in safely, because they're just a little skeptical simply because of the U.S. Postal Service, and everything that we see right now on television that says, they're taking away machines. We're not sure that the Postal Service is going to be ready for the onslaught of the mail-in ballot. So answer this for me. Do you think it is safe and secure and that this is going to be counted should we choose to do the mail-in ballot?
Sure.
Pretty sure about that, Ms. Dixon?
I am quite sure about that.
Quite sure.
Yes.
It's a yes.
It's a yes.
Our Postal Service is ready.
We have no concerns about our Postal Service not delivering that as they have been in years past. There's no concerns about that.
Perfect.
Can I add something to that, Dr.
Oh,
Schwartz?
absolutely.
And this is in part, and I'll just disclose it's in part based on some of the conversations I did have with Mr. Albent. I think what's happening, and again, we don't want to be hyper political here, but I think what's happening is there is an intentional creation of chaos, particularly at the national level. And my communications with Mr. Albent is this: this is a local concern. And the relationships that the department has with, I guess, the local postmasters is a good one. So I think the message is don't be distracted by what you hear at the federal level, because that's intentional. So don't go for the quote unquote okey doke. Know the deadlines, know your registration status, and make your election one way or other. Just know that your vote is secure in spite of what you may hear in the national noise. That's my perspective.
Do you mind if I offer a quick comment? I want to just echo, Ms. Tyson said we had a great conversation about this yesterday. I guess it was yesterday. He's absolutely right. We have a great relationship with our local postal and regional postal officials, and there are regional experts, regional postal election mail experts that are assigned to each state. And I've worked with the same expert here on the Postal Service side for multiple election cycles. And yeah, the local issue, and as Ms. Dixon said as well, locally we're very, very confident as well. We have a lot of committed people here in the Mid-Atlantic region and in the Delaware and South Jersey regions where the predominance of our mail is handled. And we're very, very confident with that. We want the voters to know they can have confidence in the system. Again, if they would choose and they would prefer to vote in person, certainly take advantage of that as well. But they really have a number of choices. So we want to reassure them they can feel confident.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that's important for the health of our seniors, and it's also important for our students as they struggle to stay in these college bubbles. So we're really happy to hear that everyone in coordination is prepared. Thank you.
Speaking of college students, I actually have a question. So a lot of college students aren't sure about dates and deadlines. What are you guys doing as the Department of Elections to make sure that we know about the dates and the deadlines for registration and mailing in dates, all of that stuff?
Right. In addition to what we have on our website, we do have communications with the local colleges as well, in terms of making sure that people are aware, getting the word out through different organizations. Just encourage everyone, again, to check their status, check early. And Mr. Tice made a very good point a few minutes ago, also in reference to college students, particularly, if we have a lot of students, say, at Del State or UD or the local colleges here that could be out of state. Definitely do your homework. The NCSL site that he mentioned is a great one. Another site I can throw out there is the EAC, eac.gov. That's the Election Assistance Commission. And they also have a lot of information about individual state requirements. It is really important for college students to check their status. And if they choose, which many students do, to vote by absentee or vote by mail ballot in their home state, those deadlines could definitely be different than Delaware, and the registration deadlines could definitely be different. And we also encourage the students as well, if they are making a decision about registration, it's always best, in terms of state of residence, always best to confer, with their parents or guardians first. We don't want, we want folks to know before they declare a state of residence, say they want to change their state, perhaps from their home state to Delaware, let's say. Make sure you confer with your parents or guardians first. We don't want anyone, for example, to put in jeopardy their financial aid status or their status with their parents, for example, their tax status. So just make sure to check those things, encourage students before they do that, before they perhaps change their state of residence. But most importantly, check, because elections historically and by definition in the U.S. are locally administered. processes. So each state, sometimes even each county, can have a different process in other states. In Delaware, we're pretty much unified the whole state, but in larger states, each county can have a different procedure. So definitely, check those sites: ncsl.org, eac.gov. Just search those sites and be sure to know the information for your home state. We don't want anyone to be caught unawares or missing a deadline.
Gotcha.
Thank you for that. Will people be able to vote at the same locations as they did in prior elections, or did it change?
Yes, we definitely try, and I know Ms. Dixon and the county offices are very much part of this process, really, in securing the polling places and making sure they are operational. We, as a rule, and we're very fortunate in Delaware that we have very consistent polling place locations. Really, the only time that they're ever changed is if an individual location that's hosting a polling place is unable to host the polling place any longer for some reason. And certainly, we are guests at their locations. So that's the only time that we make any change, and that's only done out of necessity. And if that is the case, we certainly make every effort to inform voters of the change. But so it's very consistent. So looking at we have polling place lists on our website in addition to the iVote link. But you'll notice if you look at our state primary polling place list to our general, it'd be virtually unchanged. Again, the only time we change that is if a hosting location indicates they no longer wish to host us.
I think the primary reason for that question was, so many schools are closed, and then there are other schools that are doing a hybrid. And I know in Delaware we use many schools. So with the pandemic, folks were just wondering, can I still vote at PS? Is that still going to be open? AI, different schools. So all those places will still be open. Are there any new polling locations in Delaware? Like, are we using the 76ers or 77ers? What is that? That new stadium.
Right. They're pretty much our polling places are essentially unchanged at this time. Now, one item, actually, it's interesting, it just jogged my mind when you were saying that for voters to keep in mind, and this is a future item, not for this election cycle, but we want voters to kind of have this on their radar. In the next election cycle, starting 2022, Delaware will introduce early voting. So, looking at locations like that could be sports facilities, could be things of that nature. Not in place now, but just something to keep in mind in the future. And what that'll entail, just to give everyone a kind of an insight into that, is that before primary and general elections, there will be 10 days of early voting, and there'll be 10 days that will end on the Sunday preceding the election day. And there'll be at least one location in each county and one in the city of Wilmington. And anyone will be eligible to vote in that location. Unlike on election day where you are assigned a polling place, anyone in the jurisdiction will be able to vote at that location. So that's something that's coming next election cycle. We just want to make people aware of that. Certainly when it gets closer, there'll be a lot more information about that.
Thank you. So many voters are becoming skeptical about the in-person voting as well as the mail-in. So what measures are you taking to assure that every vote is secure?
Sure. Well, certainly with our in-person voting, the new voting machines, the new voting equipment that we recently obtained, that we deployed in 2019, that equipment replaced equipment we had for about 20 years, which functioned very well, but it just reached the end of its functional life, basically. But one of the items that we wanted to make sure we addressed when we obtained new equipment, one of the prerequisites, was a paper audit trail, paper ballot. Our previous machines did not have that. They did not have a paper ballot that was produced that is an auditable, verifiable paper constitution that shows the voters' choices. We have that now. So the voting machines that we have now give the voter really the experience that they were used to, a single full-face ballot where they essentially will touch the screen and make their choices, but it produces a paper ballot record that the voter is actually able to verify before they cast their ballot. And that's also auditable. And we do a post-election audit, so where we do manual hand recounts of the actual human-readable text on there. So voters can certainly be assured that their votes are counted. And those machines are completely independent machines. They are not connected to the internet. They're not even capable of anything of that nature. So just want voters certainly to know that. We've talked a lot about the vote by mail and absentee process and the practices that are in place around that. But we do get a lot of questions and related to that about how do we keep that level of security now that we have multiple options available to vote. So some of our technology, the poll books, as Ms. Dixon mentioned, those provide some really great tools for us. For example, and Ms. Dixon mentioned this a bit in the elections in-person process, we do have information that is stored in the poll books, that is present on the poll books, that will show a voter when a voter were to arrive at a polling place, again, if they have requested a mail ballot, absentee or vote by mail, or if they've returned it. We have these safeguards in our system to ensure there's only ever one active vote, active ballot per voter. So if a voter arrives at a polling place, they've requested a ballot, they haven't returned it, we will see that. The poll worker will ensure by contacting the county elections office that that mail ballot is voided, and then the voter is allowed to vote on the voting machine. Or alternately, that the ballot has been returned already, and they would indicate to the voter, your ballot's already been returned, you won't be able to vote on the machine, again, just to keep that balance. So we do have a number of safeguards in place, all for both types.
So now that you've mentioned the touch screen, should we be, I mean, we're in a COVID crisis, should voters wear gloves, or are they sanitized between voters?
They are sanitized between voters. We provide cleaning and sanitizing equipment to our poll workers, and they are instructed that they are to clean the equipment after each use, in addition to using PPEs and social distancing. So they're very diligently wiping down the poll books and the screens, any point of contact.
Thank you. So did the Department of Elections learn anything from holding a primary election during a pandemic? And if so, what will that change about the general election?
Well, I think what we learned is that voters like choice, is what we learned. We certainly had, we have more than 76,000 absentee and vote by mail ballots that were submitted, which is an enormous increase. It was 43% of the turnout and 45% for the presidential primary, so very consistent. And just to give you a historical view on that, Delaware traditionally has between 3 to 4% absentee voting, so it was a tremendous increase. So, but we did learn that voters like vote by mail, but we also learned that voters still like to vote in person as well. So I think we learned that we need to continue to offer all of these options, which we will. We will continue to reinforce with our poll workers all of the COVID protocols. I think our poll workers did a very good job. I think Ms. Dixon would agree they did largely a very good job in adapting very quickly because this was kind of an additional responsibility on top of all the other responsibilities we already put on their shoulders. I think they did a good job, and we're just going to reinforce that. That's one of the lessons learned. Voters want to be safe. Voters want to feel secure. We have also are adding additional capacity in our offices to satisfy the vote by mail requests. We have well over 100,000 requests already in for the general election. Again, numbers are going to be huge. The percentage of vote by mail is going to be huge. But I think what we've learned is just to continue to prepare. It's really kind of, in some respects, preparing for 2 elections now, really, because you're running, traditionally we used to be 95% in person, 5% by mail or absentee. Now it's kind of half and half, maybe more so in the general. So that's a lessons learned. I think it's always about adding capacity. I think it's about maintaining, our rhythm and our cadence. We're very fortunate in Delaware that we have, through our legislature and the legislation that they passed regarding vote by mail, that we have 30 days prior to the election to prepare those ballots, which is what helps us to make our reporting much more timely than perhaps you've seen in other states, where it could be days or weeks until the election results are reported. We have a lot more flexibility to prepare the ballots in advance, which is really helpful. We do not tabulate, of course, any results to election night, but we feel it's a really, it was a great tool that the legislature gave us so that voters aren't waiting for significant periods of time for results. And we know that's an area of anxiety, certainly in this election cycle.
Certainly. Mr. Tyson, would you like to expand on that from a legal aspect?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily legal, and that's a good thing, because I don't know of any real legal issues that came out of this particular primary. And I do generally get phone calls. So what I will say is, and I was personally involved in Newcastle County in particular. I was at a number of the sites, and again, I've talked to Mr. Albence about this. and a couple of the questions tonight have been about, some cynicism or skepticism about preparedness. I think that holding the primary elections in the fashion that they were held, given COVID-19, given new technology, the public should be confident coming out of what transpired at the primaries. I don't know of very many issues. I didn't hear of them personally. I don't know if the department was overwhelmed by them. I suspect that they were not. And again, what I personally witnessed were things operating pretty much as close to normal as they could under the circumstances. So I actually applaud the department. And again, the real issue is voter confidence, and I think they should be, given what transpired at the primary.
Speaking of COVID-19, are volunteers required to have a negative COVID-19 test before they volunteer?
We make the various testing options certainly are available to poll workers. It's not required that they be tested. Earlier on in the process, back in the presidential primary, when before the state had established testing sites, in the wide expanse that they had, we had some dedicated testing that we offered, but we certainly make it known to our poll workers that testing certainly is available, but we don't require that in advance. But again, we have a whole host of protective equipment available: masks, face shields, all that we provide, gloves, sanitizing equipment. So we have a whole host of things on site to create that safe environment, as safe as we can provide.
So the senior centers, no, the poll workers aren't necessarily COVID tested for the senior centers that are.
We haven't had any requirements. I'll ask Ms. Dixon. I don't believe any of the sites have required that.
No, none of the senior centers required that our poll workers have a negative test prior to coming into their location. They did make some changes to where poll workers can go, just to reduce the possibility, but no, there were no requirements for a negative test for the election officers to go into their locations.
So basically everyone will be in PPE, so to speak, and everyone voting must wear a mask.
For voters, we actually very strongly encourage it. No voter will be denied if they do not wear a mask, because of course voting is such a fundamental right. But we really strongly encourage voters to wear them, and I think our experience on election day was very positive. I think we had very few people who refused. We have a limited supply of masks available at each polling place for voters in case they forgot their mask. But we didn't. I would say Ms. Dixon would agree. I don't think we had many instances.
No, we did not have many instances of anyone having issues with wearing a mask coming into the polling place.
Are there any other guidelines being implemented as far as COVID-19?
I think basically the PPE and the best practices around COVID-19 was one of the major ones, in addition to the implementing of the vote by mail as well. And again, I think it's just in this environment, this COVID-19 environment, I think the situation is such that we are very aware that there's a lot of anxiety, certainly not just around the virus, certainly, but just kind of a heightened level of anxiety in general. So I think one of the things again, going back to lessons learned, is just continuing to reinforce with everyone, certainly our poll workers, our staff, just that one of our prime responsibilities is again ensuring confidence on the part of the voters, and making sure that we are certainly appreciative of their concerns, but reassuring them and giving them the factual information.
Thank you. If I'm turned away for any reason at the polls, what should I do? And can you explain a provisional ballot?
Sure, absolutely. In Delaware, historically, we have been very, very committed to ensuring that as many voters as possible who arrive at a polling place will be allowed to vote on the voting machine and complete their ballot without any issues. We have, thankfully, again, through the legislature and through state Delaware code, we have tools available to us. For example, sometimes registration questions come up when someone arrives at a polling place. And because of state law and provisions in state law, our county administrators, folks like Ms. Dixon and her colleague, who is a deputy director of the opposite political party, so completely politically balanced, have authority to review and make decisions on routine issues of registration. For example, if there's perhaps an error in registration, a party affiliation issue in a primary, that's not really an issue in a general election, but say a general registration issue, they have some latitude within the law, of course, to make those decisions and to enable someone, again, if they are appropriately registered, if we determine what the issue is, to vote on the voting machine. So we make really every effort to do that. But certainly by federal law and by state law, provisional ballots are available to voters. Now, a provisional ballot essentially is kind of the last option, if you will, the last resort, when we've exhausted all other means to try to qualify the voter to vote on the voting machine. And we're very clear and Ms. Dixon was a trainer before she was on our staff, certainly, so she knows this very, very well, is that we are very directive with our voters, with our poll workers, that a provisional ballot is to be offered to any voter for whom we cannot resolve an issue. No voter is to be turned away without being offered the option of a provisional ballot. Now, in Delaware, provisional ballots are for federal offices only. That is under state law. They're for federal offices only. And the process of a provisional ballot is such that they are reviewed the day after the election, before the election results are certified, to ensure that a voter who has completed a ballot, they are, again, reviewed to be sure if that provisional ballot should be counted. And there are certain instances where they could be counted, where it could be discovered, certainly, that the person was eligible to vote. There are instances, when there are not. Let's say a voter, just give you one example, say a voter was absolutely not registered, never registered to vote, or perhaps, and insisted that they wish to vote. They're still afforded that opportunity through a provisional ballot. And the voter does have, they are provided information when they receive a provisional ballot. There is instructions on their ballot as to how they may contact the office and find the status of their ballot after it has been reviewed, and then they can certainly find out how that was resolved.
Mr. Tice, is there a legal hotline for voters in the event that all of the precautions that are in place don't work well for the voter? Is there a legal hotline?
Okay, so I would say this, probably the first recourse is to call the Department of Elections. And again, I guess that's a matter of trust. And I would say that is the administrative remedy that you should seek. It's not a legal remedy, that's an administrative remedy. But that's who I would call, obviously, for local election issues. There are, federal or there are institutions that deal with federal issues. There's I think the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law, and I think their number is 866 Our Vote. Now, that's if you want to address some issue, and again, I think that would be for federal issues. But primarily here, I would say contact the poll worker. I think the numbers are available for you for the Department of Elections at the site. Call the department while you're standing there. And I assume that folks are there manning the phones and ready to address issues on an emergent basis.
Perfect. We want to thank you for answering the burning questions that we had, and now we're going to move to some of our viewer questions, and we're going to have Sharice Brewington Carr manage those questions for us from the viewers.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. It's been a lively discussion and a lively involvement here in the chat. So I want to say a couple of things here. Folks we're getting some very good responses. People see that the comments are very informative. Great questions. They're very happy to hear about the polling places, things of that nature. There's one comment I think we should reiterate is they say they should require testing. It's still not safe. So there is some, community concern out there. And we also want to say welcome to our Madam Director, Dr. Shauna Tucker Sims, who is our Eastern Area Director of the Links Incorporated. She has joined the town hall tonight. So we're happy to have her as well. One of the questions that has come aboard here in general is that what have we learned? What is your biggest takeaway from what we've learned from the primaries? We've just gotten through the primaries and what have you. What exactly have we learned in that experience? And I would say you, Dr.
Sure. I think we've learned that we want to continue to be as responsive as we can to the voters. I think we want to look at, we examine everything after each election. So we look at everything from capacity on the phones, to how we deploy our field personnel, Is there anything that we have to look at with equipment? So we have a lot, we have some issues like that where we're looking at, do we need to add more capacity? For example, on the phones, we need to redeploy some of our field personnel. Look at areas. Also, we look at feedback from the training. I know Ms. Dixon, they look at feedback from training, evaluations, and things of that nature. What did poll workers gain from the training? What were areas where they need more assistance? Were the areas they didn't understand that wasn't as communicated as clearly as it could? So it's really a dynamic. There's a lot of operational areas that we are looking at and hope to always continuous improvement. That's really what it's all about. Every election we learn something.
Very good, thank you. What about you, Mr. Tice? Anything that you learned from this experience?
Well, and again, I had the luxury of going to several polling sites and seeing the activity, and I would say that I believe the absentee and mail-in votes took a little stress off of the in-person voting. Probably the voters who participate in this primary would probably say that it was probably a stress-free process going in person. So I think that's what I learned, and it was quite orderly, except for some of us who were rowdy and cheering for our particular candidate. But the process that the Department of Elections was running was quite orderly.
Very good. One of the things, and this was as we were preparing for this set that we began to talk about, and you may have mentioned it, maybe I didn't hear it, but to talk about the need of actual poll workers. Do you have, again, the capacity of individuals that you need to be able to get through this next big election?
Sure. You want to mention it?
Yes.
So we are always looking for additional poll workers. It's very easy to sign up to be a poll worker. As Mr. Albans mentioned, you can go to elections.de.gov, and there are links on there on how to be a poll worker for each of the 3 counties. So even though we did have a need at some certain locations, we persevered. And as Mr. Tice said, it was stress-free for some, and it was pretty orderly. But we would still like for additional people to get involved in the process, not just to help us along on election day, but I think it would help for them to know more of the process and can get the right information and about elections itself. So being a part of the election process helps everybody. Not just the voters coming in, but the persons working at those locations as well. They have a better understanding of how things work.
Well, we've been thinking about, as an organization, as the Wilmington, Delaware chapter of the Links Incorporated, about ways that we can help also. And I'm sure there are other organizations that may be thinking about what to do. And one of the things that has come up in general is about trying to consider individuals who may need ADA accommodations, American Disabilities Association accommodations. They have hearing impairment, visual impairment. We heard some things about individuals actually standing in lines for long periods of time, and perhaps maybe in this COVID environment, how they might be impacted physically. New condition, if you will, impacting individuals that may be going to vote or deterring them from voting. How can we help? What do you think about those conditions or situations, or have you considered that in terms of preparation for those voters?
We do have one thing I did want to mention in addition. Certainly we don't want ever folks to wait in line. Thankfully, luckily in Delaware, our wait times are generally very short compared to other states. But we certainly are always telling our poll workers, and part of their training is to be aware, to be sensitive to the needs of the voters. Just, I hate to say common sense type things, but certainly, if you see a voter, who needs assistance, ensure that, provide that assistance. If someone needs a chair, something as simple as that, if someone is waiting in line, help them in that way. Just be, common courtesy. And most of our poll workers, the vast majority, are very, very courteous, very caring, about their job. I did want to mention one other thing, and you brought up a good point that I didn't really cover with the machines, and I just want folks to be aware of it for people who need perhaps an ADA accommodation. One of the considerations when we purchased our new equipment was we needed to upgrade and enhance the ADA opportunities that voters would have. Our previous machines had certainly satisfactory ADA functionality, but it really was time to re-examine it. So when voters do, if they choose to vote at the polling place, the voting machines have a number of different options for them. We'd like them to know. Voters can, and the poll workers are trained in how to do this, although it's very intuitive for the voter themselves right on the machine itself. They can increase the font size to large font for the display. They can go to a contrast, black and white versus color. We have a universal voting console device, which provides an audio translation of the ballot. It is also adapted with Braille and differently shaped buttons with raised edges of different shapes and colors. There is also, that device provides an interface for an assistive device, such as a sip and puff device, someone who may have a significant mobility impairment. We want them to be able to interact with the voting device and to vote independently. That was one of our goals when we purchased this equipment. We wanted any voter to go in to have that capability to vote independently. We do have option under the law, certainly, for poll workers. They can be poll workers of opposite political parties, so there's no perception of impropriety or any thing of that nature. Or the voter's own assistant, relative, friend, something like that, can always go in the poll to help them. We also have assistive technologies available for absentee voting as well. If a voter chooses to vote under the provisions of absentee, they can receive their ballot with certain, they have options for electronic delivery that can accommodate some different impairments, for example. So we do have a lot of options out there. We want voters to know that.
That is good to know. So if a voter comes to the poll, they should declare that they need assistance. Is that
sure?
What you're suggesting?
They can request it. And I also encourage, I always tell folks, I encourage any voter certainly to make use of the assistive technology that we have. It's available to anyone. Any voter can request that. The poll workers are to provide that. If a voter requests it, they are to provide the assistive equipment. I just encourage other voters who maybe don't have a need to use it just to become familiar with it, so they can perhaps explain it as well to other voters who may have a need, and let them know it's very easy to use, very accessible.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've got room for just two more questions here, and then we're going to start to move to our wrap up. One of the questions is which polls can we expect congestion and people need to allot perhaps maybe more time?
That's a good question.
There, I don't know if Ms. Dixon had any comments on any location. We have certain locations that are certainly busier
than others, yes. Generally, the locations in the city are generally busier than the ones outside of the city. So that's really the
no particular
main place. No particular one now.
Just a quick comment on that I would add, too, is that we just advise voters that the traditional times, I think regardless of where your location is, traditional times, early morning when the polls first open, certainly they're getting up and running, so that's can be a hectic time. Kind of that 7 to 8:30 window. Sometimes a little bit at lunchtime, and then also in the evening, because we close at 8. We're 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So anywhere from 5:30 to 8 can be busy as people come after work. So if you can, maybe plan to go midday, especially with a lot of people working from home nowadays. Maybe go mid-afternoon, mid-morning when it might not be as busy.
And last question, and it's around this environment of COVID awareness. If an individual happens to come to the poll, maybe they've forgotten their mask or what have you, do the poll workers have the capacity at the polling place to actually give a mask?
Yeah, we do.
Very
we do have a limited supply available, but they are available, certainly.
Very good. Thank you so much. We're going to turn back now to our moderators here to close out.
Thank you so much. This has been a great discussion, and we have addressed the safety and the security of the voting process in this unprecedented election. Thank you, Mr. Albans, for making yourself available. Ms. Tracy Dixon, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Leroy Tice, for your legal expertise. And lastly, but certainly not least, thank you so much, Ashley Davis. She is Miss Delaware State, but she is going to be one heck of an attorney. Thank you also to the Links Incorporated, our chair of the National Trends, as well as legislative, Sharice Brewington Carr, Marla Blunt Carter, Shakisha Clark, Tony Bush Neal, and Maria Bynum. Thank you each so much. It has been an exciting night, and we have wanted to get these questions answered, and we thank you all for taking the time and thinking it not robbery to let us know exactly what the preparations are in this COVID pandemic. Now we just want to make sure you, the voter, are ready. So what you'll need is your voting day plan. So you want to register to vote. Check your registration. You want to identify your polling place. Identify the time you plan to vote. How will you get to the poll? Check the weather and be prepared. If we need an umbrella, let's get an umbrella. Might be a little chilly. It was chilly this morning. Grab a jacket. Wear comfortable shoes and clothes. Eat before you go. Or as Michelle Obama said, take dinner and take breakfast if you need it. Take your medication. That's critical. Wear a mask. Protect yourself. Social distance. Abide by the rules. And bring your ID, driver's license or your state ID. For more information, ivotede.gov. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope this answers your questions. If we see more questions in the chat box, we'll talk with our legal strategist. We will talk with the Department of Elections, and we'll get that on our website. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
all have a role in shaping the future